with LLMs, it's easy to go from 0 to 80%. So 0 to the MVP, you can do like in an afternoon sometimes, depending on what you're building. But to get to something that you can ship to production, that can take months. And then to actually like build a product that is great enough that users refer each other to it and it's a great company that you build around it, that's a lifetime of work still. Like LLMs are not abstracting that away from us.
Hey everybody, welcome to Smart Speakers. Today we're joined by Tom Shapland, co-founder and CEO of Canonical. Before diving into voice AI, Tom founded an agriculture-type startup that used sensors and computer vision to help farmers measure plant thirst, literally determining when crops needed water by analyzing weather patterns and taking pictures of vines. Pretty crazy stuff. After selling that company in 2023, Tom launched Canonical, which helps voice AI developers visualize their conversation flows and understand where calls are succeeding or failing. Tom's going to share his journey from plant science to AI analytics and why building voice AI that actually works is way harder than it looks. So let's dive in. Tom, welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to be here. Great to talk to you guys.
So first question we always ask everyone, like, what was your first aha moment with AI?
My first aha moment with AI was at my previous company. We were an agriculture technology company, and I have a background in atmospheric science and agronomy, and I had tried every method under the sun to try to model the relationship between how quickly plants dry out and soil water capacity in the weather. Like basically we were trying to predict for farmers, like if you don't irrigate, how long until these plants dry out? And I used every like different non-AI approach to it. And then we ended up hiring an astronomer, and she used Monte Carlo Markov chains, which were like for a little bit there, like before neural networks, that people thought like, oh, we're out of like the AI winter. We've discovered these Monte Carlo Markov chains and they're going to solve our AI problems. And she applied it to this plant water relations problem we were having, and it just nailed it. And I was like, how did you do this? Like
That's so
how did you
crazy.
figure this out? Like how does
What
this
year was this?
works? And this was in 2017, somewhere
Okay.
around there.
Yeah.
And it just spoke to, maybe even earlier, but it just spoke to like the thing I remember her saying is like, look, it just works. I know it's a big hammer and this is a small nail that we're hitting it with, but it just works.
Did you think of it as AI at the time, or is it more kind of like looking back on it? Because I remember working with Monte Carlo Markov chains, and you're right, it's basically like inference at some level, but I didn't think of it as AI at the time.
Nobody thought of anything as AI at the time,
Yeah.
really. Mostly I just saw them as a really powerful model. And if I'm being honest, that's how I see LLMs too. Is like, I don't see these
Totally.
things as AI. I see them as very powerful models. I think for me, it opened up my eyes that like all these statistical methods I'd used in academia um, were good, but there was a whole nother tier of model that was available that could just blow these old things out of the way and just you could build really cool stuff with. We really emerged from this AI winter with the gains in computer vision as people were trying to build self-driving cars and thinking about how can we use neural networks for computer vision. And we built a computer vision product at that ag technology company where you would take a picture of a vine and it would tell you how thirsty it was. And that also was like pretty amazing experience, like to put that, put a phone in tell a farmer, hey, open up your phone and open up this app in test flight and pointing at the vine, it's going to tell you in real time how thirsty it is. Like they'd never seen anything like that. And
That's amazing.
that was a really neat moment for me too. It's like, oh, we could build so much cool stuff with these neural networks.
That's
It
amazing.
must have blown their minds. Did you need a ton of data to make it accurate? Like, did you have plant thirstiness pictures at hand through your startup, or like how did that end up panning out?
We built a sensor that measured how thirsty the plants were. In fact, Harish, I didn't realize until preparing for our interview, despite the fact that we know each other, that you're the co-founder of Octopart, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's been many years since I've had an association with it, but it's been many years since I started it with friends. But yeah,
Yeah, I remember when we were first building our first versions of the sensors, like going on Octopart to look for things that we needed.
I'm so sorry.
If it was ever down, it was Harish's fault.
I'll give you the names of my co-founders. You can write them if with any complaints. Yeah, that's really funny. So you're building hardware projects at your first startup, which it'd be cool to kind of dive into that, I guess. So, because both of these examples, it sounds like are related to your first startup. Is that right?
Yeah, so they're both from the first startup. In the first startup, we were measuring how thirsty the plants were with sensors, and also every time one of our teammates went out to a field to like fix the sensor or like, swap in a new part for the crummy part that we bought on Octopart, they would take lots of pictures of the vines. So we had this huge data set of the vines and labels for each picture of how thirsty they were. And that's what we used to train the computer vision model.
That's super cool. How did you like put that together? That at the time, I imagine it was one of the first sort of like novel uses in agriculture of computer vision.
So we ended up shipping the product in like 2019. So it wasn't like super early. Like we weren't building it directly on the TensorFlow API. Like there are some abstractions away from that. So at least the tech community was familiar with the power of computer vision. But I remember when we shipped the product and launched it, going to grower meetings and standing up in front of them and talking to them about AI. And like there was no other conversations at the time about AI. Like the fact that I was trying to explain to them like how machine learning works, that it's like a recipe and you have these inputs of like shake and eggs and sugar, and you have these outputs of these different cakes, and like the machine learning is learning the recipe. Like they'd never, nobody really in society was really talking about those things at that point. Not a lot of people outside of tech.
You had studied agriculture in grad school, and this is like your startup was a commercialization of that technology. Is that right?
Yeah. I'd studied atmospheric science and agriculture in grad school, and it was a turbulent science innovation that measured how the wind carries water vapor away from the field.
How did you go from grad school studying it to wanting to start a company?
I always wanted to start a business, and part of what was appealing about this particular project to work on in grad school was like, if we could make it work, there was a path to trying to commercialize it. There could be a commercial need for this, a commercial use case for this. And when we figured out how to make it work, I started a company around it and was lucky enough that company got into YC. And that's how we know each other.
Yeah, that's right. The Octopart YC tool connection.
It's a huge Octopart customer mafia, and we're going to bring them all on the show. The show's going to go on for another 10 years. It's going to be awesome. You saw a commercial. You chose to start this company because you saw that there was a path to commercialization from your grad school work. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. We invented this I helped develop this technology in grad school, and then I started a company around it.
What were some of the bigger kind of challenges and pivotal moments along the way?
The first, and this seems to be an unexpected recurring theme in our conversation, is hardware. Like hardware is just so hard. And you talk to any founder that has built a hardware product, and it's just so hard. Like you have to be so right. You have to be so certain about your product before shipping it. And if you make mistakes, they're very expensive to remedy. So hardware was definitely tough. But as hard as hardware was, the bigger challenge was trying to fit a non-VC shaped business in a VC shaped hole. And that business was, the first few years, we grew pretty quick. We raised a seed round, and things looked like we were on track to be a VC, a venture scale business, but at least on the outside. But internally, like it was really clear that like the market wasn't really big enough. It was too fragmented. It wasn't that there was one big market. There is one big market of agriculture in a sense, like there's lots of farm fields, but actually it's extremely fragmented and expensive to break into each one. And like it was a really there's so much education you have to do with your customers and resistance to change that you have to do that it also slows down how rapidly people would adopt it. And it was just very clear that like we grew fast initially, and we weren't going to there wasn't going to be an inflection where we grew faster. And then I look back on the most stressful parts of my career, it was like working with our team that was on board for this like venture scale ride and trying to convince them and convince ourselves that it was a venture scale ride when it really wasn't. Doing all these things that like the startup community says you should do, and they just did not feel right. Like, hiring an AI or an SDR team when it was clearly that's not the sales motion with farmers, but that's what you do as a tech company, and then having to lay off the SDR team. And it's just one of the lessons I like to tell founders is like, it's okay if you're not venture scale. Like you can still build a successful business, and it's so rare that a company comes along that like looks like Uber, that like it's okay. It's so much matter of luck, and like don't continue to suffer under trying to be something you're not. Like, it's such a terrible pain to try to be something you're not, and like, let go, look at the bigger picture, and then act accordingly. You don't have to follow the dogma.
I appreciate you being so open about sharing that. I feel like, Harish, I don't know if you remember the moment when you knew that it wasn't really a venture scale thing that we were working on at Chartable.
Yeah.
There was that summer where we had all this like, kind of personnel issues and we were missing our sales targets. I just was like, in my heart, I'm like, oh shit. Like, how can we make this work? Like, how can this be, how can I like say with a straight face that this is like $1 billion opportunity? That's just a tough thing to do,
Yeah.
And that's when I feel like I knew that I wanted to pivot or sell the business, because it's like we were not on the chill train, we were on the express train, but we were running out of track, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we ran into that with Chartable. It sounds like when you ran into that with Tool, though, you kind of deliberately embraced it. Like, even the way you're talking about the challenge, you're not saying that there were challenges with the company, you're saying that there were challenges with the way you saw, or like kind of the way VC was influencing the way you ran the company. But actually, there was a happy path that didn't involve going after a venture scale opportunity.
Yeah, and I think you can use like analogy from just human experience. Like, I somehow get roped into coaching my kids' lacrosse team, but I actually really hate kids. And like, at some point you have to realize like, oh, I shouldn't be the coach. Like, I should, and society wants me to be the coach because that's what like a dad does. He coaches the
And it
team.
would be good to be a coach, right? It would be good, but
yeah. Yeah, but it doesn't fit for me. And so like, it's okay, recognize that. And you're gonna be happier if you go be yourself. And like, the lesson of Thule was like, go be yourself. And what you are is an agriculture technology company that's not going to grow fast because your product is too technical and for the market is too fragmented. But we were lucky enough that we had gotten to profitability because the market that we were in was liked our product, and we had put all this effort into nurturing that market and educating that market about what we were building. And so we had optionality. We pivoted from being a venture-backed company, and everyone that wanted to be in the venture game, and be part of like the next Uber, they all left. But they weren't a good fit for the company culture anyway. And the people that stayed were the ones that loved the product that we were building and loved our customers and believed in the potential to build cool stuff on this proprietary data set, like this computer vision model we built. And like, it was a great company to work at for a while. It was a wonderful place.
That's awesome. And you guys eventually got acquired, is that right?
Yes, yeah. Eventually, CropX, which is a later stage startup, when they acquired us, they were about at the Series C stage. They acquired us in January of 2023.
Amazing.
Was that something that happened organically, or how did your journey at Thule come to an end then?
It's complicated because it's like a lot of things in a founder's journey. It's not just one thing you can point to. There's a lot of different things you can point to. I still really liked my customers. I still really liked the product we were building. I really appreciated our team. Every day I felt grateful to get to work with that team. But there were some things for me that I had grown weary of. One of them is like, I never got out of a sales role the entire time at that company. And I have a technical background, and I never could get the company quite big enough that like I wasn't on the front line sales. And like I was always one of the guys in the trenches with the gun shooting people. And like, I don't want to shoot people. And that's what sales feels like for me. It's something that's not something I want to do.
Don't make Tom shoot people or play or coach lacrosse. And then I think
they should have never asked me to coach lacrosse. I don't know what they're thinking. Yeah. So that was part of it, as I didn't see a path, like with our growth rate for like, how am I going to stop every sales season? It's like, oh man, I have to go through this again. And like economic issues too. The inflation was really high and our growth rate wasn't keeping up with, like, it was just above inflation, but it looked like those lines were getting crossed. As soon as those lines cross, you start losing employees because I can't, pay them enough to keep up with what they used to make. And that means more sales work for me. And I was like, I don't want that. And I also think like there's just so many interesting things going on in the world that I wanted to kind of go explore other things. And then lastly, I also recognized my own limitations. Like I kind of brought Thule to this point where it was in the California market. We had this sensor product that was really cool, this computer vision product that was really cool, but somebody else could take what we had and figure out how to bring this to the whole world. And that person was not me. It would be somebody who was better at raising money. And CropX and their CEO is incredibly good at vision and raising money. And they really have taken the product globally. And that's something I couldn't do. So all those things kind of factored into the decision for me to actively look for a new home for Thule.
Yeah, we obviously had sort of like a similar path with Chartable where we ended up seeking out an acquisition. And I just want to say congrats. Like it's not an easy thing, even if you have a company that's working and, could have a good home somewhere else. It's a long, drawn out, taxing process to actually go through acquisition, and you got out the other end. And it sounds like it's a great home. It must be really gratifying to know that the product might live on with CropX and even kind of like gain this global distribution.
Yeah, and likewise, congratulations to you guys too. For anyone listening, like acquisitions, you see them all the time in the news, but every single one is a miracle. Like they're
it always feels like it's going to fall apart.
Yeah, I have so much more gray hair than I did before we did the acquisition, for sure. And I feel like it's gotten better. I know it's a video podcast, right? Well, I don't know. Yeah.
It hasn't gotten better, Dave.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I read about these things like, oh, every week there's like all these acquisitions or whatever. Gosh, they're actually just so hard to do, and like feel like the most unlikely alignment of stars has to happen in order for them to happen. Mm-hmm. So yeah, hats off to you. You sold the company, amazing outcome, and you started something new. I'd love to hear about that.
A lot of my motivation for starting a new company was I wanted to work with our CTO again, Adrian Cowham. He's just a great guy who can build anything. He was always the cornerstone of our culture and one of my closest friends and like the best teammate you could ever ask for. And so there's an opportunity where I thought like, oh, there's this little window where Adrian doesn't have another job yet. I better like try to latch onto him and figure out how to work with him again. We initially, when we started working together, it was like, started this new company. It was late 2023, and we knew we just wanted to build something in LLMs, like every other entrepreneur out there. It's like, okay.
You had a very unique insight.
That was my unique insight. LLMs. Let's build something in LLMs. And initially, we started building like this caching layer to reduce the latency on LLM calls, because you're calling this big slow model. Especially back then, they were slower and they cost more. So a caching layer could make it so that they were faster and cheaper. But it just wasn't the right thing to build. We got some initial customers. We started reaching out to voice AI developers because this was late 2023, early 2024, when we're starting to see this emergence of giving voices to LLMs. And just not enough people wanted the caching product, but we fell in love with the voice AI space because like I met people like you guys. Like it's such a fun community to be involved with, and there's all these interesting problems in it.
It's interesting because the cache is also a developer tool, and where you all have landed now is also, sort of like helping developers on their journey with AI. So it seems like that's a little bit of a theme with how you're approaching the space in general.
Yeah, I think we have a deep interest in data, and
that's the underpinning.
Yeah, that's the underpinning. And like generally, if you're building a vertical application, you're not selling people data or manipulations of data in interesting ways, at least not explicitly. But a lot of what we're trying to do with our current product, how do we take your stream of voice AI calls, the 100 you did in the last day, and help you figure out what happened in them? How do we manipulate that data in such a way that makes it easier for you to see what your agent is doing and improve it?
And this is Canonical, and I know we skipped a little bit of a step for how you got to Canonical, but it sounds like you fell in love with the voice AI community and you wanted to think about how you could kind of bring data tools to the folks using voice AI or deploying voice AI. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about how you got the insight that led to Canonical specifically?
I mean, it started with the startup thing where you like go talk to your friends that are building voice AI about like, hey, what do you need? We're pivoting. And the way it ended up playing out was we initially heard from people saying that they wanted more insight into what was going on with audio related metrics. Like what really is the latency? I'm using this voice orchestration platform. What really is the latency? My customers are complaining that the AI is taking too long to respond. So we built a suite of audio metrics that we shared with our first few like prospects, I would call them design partners in modern startup speak.
Yeah, that's like a nice way of saying people who aren't paying you or whatever. It's like,
yes. Yeah, we built a bunch of stuff for people who aren't paying us, and then showed it
yes,
to them, and they said it sucked.
but then you made it better.
Yes, then we made it better. So we showed them the audio metrics, like interruptions and all that sort of thing, and they're like, "Great, but I don't really know what to do with this." I'm like, "But you told me you wanted this, so what do we do about that?"
This is a very classic data startup problem. Well, I'm showing you all the data you asked for, and then they say, "Well, yeah, but now what do I do?"
Yes, exactly. So then to figure out what to build next, I thought of like all these sales conversations I'd been in. What I don't like about sales is that how repetitive it is. It's the same conversation again and again. You're leading people through the same stages. I thought of like, okay, well, sales conversations have stages, and I've trained so many people on how to like recognize these stages and how to manage these stages. I bet a lot of these voice AI agents similarly have lots of stages that they're leading callers through. So we built a prototype that where we would take a bunch of calls from a particular agent and break those calls down into stages, and then we could show for each individual call what stages it went through, and then for a bunch of calls we could map out like what did this agent do, for 100 calls? Like, did it start at this stage and then did it mostly go to this other stage, or did it mostly go to appointment booking, or did it mostly go to asking to speak with a representative? And then when we showed that to the people who weren't paying us, that's when they were like, maybe we'll pay you for this. And that was sort of a turning point in the history of this company.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome that having looked at the visualizations, it's so pretty too. Like it's very pleasing to look at. You can kind of tell that y'all spent time not just on the mapping, like getting the stages right, but also making it usable and friendly. Super interesting stuff.
Yes, that's credit to Adrian. Adrian is a great engineer, and he has a great product sense too. It makes me wonder, like, what am I contributing to the story here? And then it leads me to think sales. And I'm like, damn it.
Just sales. And I heard Canonical is starting a lacrosse team. So
this is not a good fit.
One thing that I think is really interesting about kind of like where it netted out, Dave and I have been playing with these agents and taking different approaches to modeling them out. And recently we've been using Lane Graph as sort of a modeling layer for the different interactions that the AI can have with the user. And, you look at the state and the visualization that y'all have of how a voice call is progressing, and it looks remarkably like, kind of the graph that you might build or you might visualize when you're thinking about modeling the interaction to begin with. And I just wonder if that's kind of fundamental in some way to these interactions that folks are having, or the way that, we're coding them, kind of instinctively.
Machine voices for handling customer interactions is not new. It was just previously built on a different sort of system. It was built on these rule-based or intent-based systems, which were basically state machines that would walk the caller through different states. And it's interesting to kind of see what has happened in the LLM-based voice AI world, where initially everyone was just using one system prompt. There was no notion of individual states in between these different stages of a call. And now we're seeing the community move back towards this idea of building with workflows, where you're breaking the voice AI agent instructions into individual stages that are gated. So what do we have now? The developer defines these different stages of the call, but rather it being rule-based and stupid, where like you can't, if you say anything outside of like the 5 responses that are expected within that stage, like look at these like stage-based systems, like now compared to what they used to have, what's neat about the LLM-based ones is like, yeah, you're still within a stage, but the user has more freedom and more ability to like direct the call how they want it, and for it to really understand them better and help them meet their need. I don't know. What do you guys think of? Isn't it kind of funny that we've kind of gone full circle here? What's your guys' interpretation of it?
It's, we talk about it a lot with each other, and whenever we're coding on top of LLMs, it's such a fine balance to know what to make deterministic and what to make probabilistic, and where the boundaries are. But the first attempt we had at modeling a voice call, it was essentially completely probabilistic, just handed over the whole thing to the LLM with one big prompt and a few tools. And it didn't work. I mean, it worked, but it didn't work. Like it was really kind of strange. And now we're adding more of this sort of stage-based determinism to it. And it still can get stuck. And, there's like still that probabilistic sort of like weirdness that can come into play, but it's so much better at accomplishing an objective now.
Yes.
Because we can model it out. I don't know where it nets out, but I think it's better this way right now.
I feel like it's trade-offs, right? We're trying to dial it in. Like Tom, you put it really nicely about giving the user the freedom to kind of direct where things go. The thing that sucks about me calling Walgreens and trying to get an update on my prescription today is that like, you have to wait and go through the deterministic steps. And like, that's good for the Walgreens, programmers who like had to put that system together so they could be sure that somebody can get to that menu eventually. But when we're building these things now, it seems like we have made the choice to live in this land of probabilism, of non-determinism. But there's a good trade-off there. It's like the trade-off is that folks get freedom. The call doesn't have to be robotic. But there's definitely a tension between objective completion and how fuzzy the path of the call can be, right? It's like if you say like, you must get this information from the user before they proceed to the next step, then you're basically just rebuilding kind of crappy call tree. Press 1 for sales, press 2 for lacrosse. But if you're too loose, then it skips steps all the time, or it might not ask the right thing in the right way. So we're all, at least for me, it's been a process of kind of learning the new way of doing things and like this, how to dial in appropriately on a per task basis, like how much freedom you want the user to have and how important a particular piece of data is in a particular format, for example.
Yeah, very well said. I completely agree with that. And I think that's a nice segue for me to talk about why what we're building is so important.
So why is what you're building so important?
Well, I think that there's always going to be this element of non-determinism when you're building with LLMs. Even as much as we try to constrain them, we're going to find that if we constrain them too much, then we've basically rebuilt the phone tree. So we need to have to allow some amount of freedom in there. And when you combine this idea that there's non-determinism with the human interacting with it, things are not going to go as planned. Humans are nature's most unpredictable force. So you may sit there at your IDE and write out exactly what you think the conversation is going to go like, but it's not until you put it in front of people that you start seeing what's actually happening in the calls. And that's the data you need to actually build a great product and iterate on it. And this is nothing new to software development. Think of all the websites. Think of the websites you guys have built where you're like, that's the button to buy. Hit the pay button. It's big and it's red. And
why don't you push it?
Please click it.
Yes. Yeah, people are unpredictable. You need to be monitoring what they're doing when interacting with your product in order for you to optimize your conversion rates through whatever objective you're trying to achieve.
Who's using it right now? What kind of folks have adopted Canonical into their workflow?
I want to answer that in terms of who is using it and when they're using it. The people that are using it are mostly people that are building voice AI agents in a particular vertical. So they're more at the application layer, and it tends to be developers, or it's a lot of early stage companies. So it's both the developer and the business lead are the same person, and they're the ones that are using it. And when, I think, is also an interesting question. So we often have, when people reach out to us, they're at a stage where they've built an MVP, they've got their customer to use the product on some small amount of their call volume, and they're seeing that the conversions, the successful outcomes are lower than they expected. And the customer is saying, I'm not going to deploy this at full scale and for all my call volume until you can get to 90% of the calls making it through the workflow and the users getting what they want with the voice AI. And right now you're at 30. So that's when people come to us and they're like, okay, I actually need to know what's going on in my calls. And randomly sampling and listening to random calls is not doing it for me. I tried, but it's not doing it for me. I need a more systematic way of understanding what's happening in my calls. And that's when they start uploading calls to our platform.
Yeah, Harish has spent a lot of time listening to calls.
It's crazy making.
And actually, a weird parallel to Chartable Days, Harish spent a lot of time listening to podcasts to confirm that ads ran in particular place. So Harish has spent a lot of time listening to things he really didn't want to listen to because we didn't have the tech. We didn't have Canonical.
I'm an early canonical.chat product.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a different way, I think, of kind of like understanding how your code is working, where it does seem like you have to deploy it. Dave and I just had this experience with what we're working on right now where, we're building it a little bit in isolation, but as soon as we got even one user, we just started noticing that the beautiful little model we had for how the interaction should go with the user just totally fell over and broke.
And then we got one more user, and it broke
again. So it seems like a really important part of the ecosystem, even more so than kind of like website days, where observability is also kind of like the way you test and the way you actually like improve the product, because you need the data to do it. Are there interesting trends or sort of like things that you've noticed falling out of this, where folks will see the data, see the stages and then kind of iterate?
It depends on, it's a function of their experience with building voice AI agents. The state of voice AI right now is that we are stringing together these different models, and they're really powerful. They're really amazing, but they're not quite there yet. So what we're essentially doing is stringing together systems where like they're almost there. They're good enough that we can build something if you build enough workarounds and band-aids on top of it. So if you have a lot of experience building voice, yes,
yes,
yes, and some of it sounds bad to call them band-aids and workarounds, because some of them are really neat and elegant engineering solutions that I've seen. But some of them, sometimes it's just like the only solution here is to like hack this thing to make it work for this particular problem we're dealing with. If somebody's new to building voice AI agents, the sorts of problems they'll identify using our platform are stuff that like are pretty obvious if you've been building them for a while, which is like, don't ask the voice AI agent to ever spell anything. It's not going to go well. The text-to-speech models they're just not, they're mostly trained on people reading books, and like, who wants to be read a book where you're just spelling letters? Like, that rarely happens.
Yeah.
So like, that's an example where like an obvious problem that somebody is relatively new to the space will like pop in and see like, why are all my calls dropping off at like the collect email stage? Oh, this is not going well. I need to figure out a different workaround for collecting their email information. And then if you're a more sophisticated builder that's been building voice AI longer, I think the stuff you're going to find is a little more idiosyncratic to whatever your application is and your data set is. So, and that's like the nature of like software engineering. It's not like you build it once and you're like, I did it, I built it, no more work to do. All the work is done. Like, there's continual refining and iteration because things are always changing under our feet. So an example of that is like, you may have two different people you're working with at the same larger organization, and one uploads a data set to your platform of like all the phone numbers you want to call. And like, when you first build it, it's like, oh, this works great. Like, every time it calls one of these people, it's the right person to call. And then someone else in the company uploads a different data set, and like, their data it hasn't been sanitized. And like, you're finding that the voice AI agent is saying the wrong type of thing because it's talking to the different users than it expected. And you wouldn't have found that, that 3% of the data that you're uploading for the phone calls that you're making is bad data if you weren't like meticulously and systematically looking for bad calls.
So it's not even just the call kind of like interaction itself, but at times Canonical will even help you kind of pinpoint data quality or data integrity issues, where presumably what that means is the prompt is poorly constructed because it doesn't match the actual person you're talking to.
I think the meta point around that is that if you work a lot with LLMs, they just seem magical, and you think that they solve the problem all on its own, and you get lazy about it. And you think like, oh, I have LLMs now. I don't actually need to do the work of software engineering anymore. The LLM will just figure it out. But actually, we still have to do the work of software engineering. Like, all the problems that came up in writing code and building software systems without LLMs still exist. We now just have like this wild card in the room that like sometimes, most of the time does things really well, but sometimes you're like, what the heck did it just do and why did it do that?
Yeah, we put the wild card like right in the middle of the system, right? I think it's a good point, though. I mean, like I've been in this mode the last couple of weeks where I've just been vibe coding a little bit more, for lack of a better term, like using cursor agent mode and just like letting it take the reins more, and it kind of feels amazing. I don't know what's amazing until you hit that roadblock where it's like kind of doesn't work either. Yes, like it can do so much amazing stuff, but like it's still, we have so much engineering to do here. And like, yeah, so like maybe some of it will get automated away at different points. Maybe the next revision of the model will be better at spelling things like letter by letter or hearing words letter by letter. But that's just going to move the goalpost, because now you're going to expect even better calls along some other different access, right?
What kind of patterns are you seeing now with voice AI adoption? Now you have all this data you're getting in from your customers, and presumably there might be industry-wide sort of like stages that you're seeing.
I think one important pattern, and this is a nice segue to what we were just talking about too, was like with LLMs, it's easy to go from 0 to 80%. So 0 to the MVP, you can do like in an afternoon sometimes, depending on what you're building. But to get to something that you can ship to production, that can take months. And then to actually like build a product that is great enough that users refer each other to it, and it's a great company that you build around it, that's a lifetime of work still. Like LLMs are not abstracting that away from us. There's still so much engineering work to do. And I see a similar thing, I think, in general with voice AI right now. Like most of the voice AI world is at the stage where they've built in a relatively short period of time some sort of MVP, and it's enough signal that they've like signed up a few customers on a trial basis. They've maybe raised money on it. And now I think most voice AI companies are in that like 80% to 95%, where they're trying to actually make this thing production worthy, trying to get their customers to go from using it on a small call volume to a larger call volume. And I think it speaks to how nascent all of this voice AI stuff still is. Like most people are still just trying to figure out, how do I like get my agent to scale up? How do I build that trust with my customer? How do I make this thing work better?
Yeah, so it demos well. I mean, we've definitely experienced this where it can wow people. But it sounds like what you're saying is that wow factor only goes so far, and you still have to do just like very good product work, just like you always have, in order to get that last mile and convince folks to completely trust you, and really sort of like let you take the reins at the company with call volume.
Yep, absolutely.
Anything surprising that you've seen from your customers?
I've always admired excellence. And when I see that in any domain, it's like, it's really neat to see. It's inspiring. And I've seen voice AI agents where I'm like, how did they do that? That is so cool. It's such a beautiful experience that they created. There's so much room for craftsmanship. And I think what surprises me is a lot of like in humans' capabilities to build amazing things. And in the case of a voice AI, what that essentially means is somebody like took the basic pieces, and even putting together these basic pieces, but by the way, is an amazing feat of creativity and engineering. But once you stitch together all these models and can put a voice and turn taking and all that to an LLM, there's another chasm you have to cross to build something that was like a really nice user experience, and where someone has thought through all these different like edge cases and really leads the customer where they're going. Like people are building really amazing voice AI agents, and some are really getting good scale with them already. And it's really fun to see what those look like.
That's a good point, that it's basically a new kind of UX, right? When the UX of mobile apps evolved so much, and the web has evolved so much, like looking at web pages even from 10 years ago. It's funny, right? So they all have like these like totally different layouts and stuff. Everything is UX basically. Like on a website, copy is UX, and then voice, what the thing says and how it responds to the user, and all the kind of the trade-off that you give it between determinism and probabilism is like a choice that the designer can make to ensure a better outcome for the different parties involved. And what do you see happening in the voice AI industry in the next few years?
I think what's going to be really fun to see, especially as people on the inside of voice AI, is the public acceptance of voice AI. Right now, I mean, like during the holidays, for example, when you interacted with family outside of tech, you'll bring up like, oh, let me just use ChatGPT to real quick to answer that. And they're like, oh, I don't really use that thing. And then you're like, what? You don't use this? And there's lots of people that really aren't using LLMs yet in the general public. And like you see this in voice AI calls too. Like, so voice AI is a smaller subset of LLM usage. Most people have not interacted by voice with a voice AI agent in the wild yet. In fact, I think I'm one of those people. Like I've interacted with them because whenever I see one, I call one, but I've never like tried to do something that I need to do for work or for my personal life and found I was talking to a voice AI agent.
That's an interesting point. So you're like a voice AI connoisseur, but I'm not yet run into one in the wild.
Yeah. Yeah, when that day comes up, you guys will be the people I slack first about it.
Okay, excellent.
Just happen.
That's going to be a big day. We'll probably drop an emergency episode of the pod. Tom actually got a call from scheduling the next lacrosse game. It's going to be great.
It's going to become more normal for people to interact with voice AI agents. They'll realize what's happening and they'll come to not just accept it, but prefer it because it actually can get stuff done for them. Like they'll call in what they will have called in IVR and they'll get frustrated. They're talking to it in IVR and be like, can you just connect me with like the voice AI agent instead? And I think part of what's going to herald this, we've all been waiting for like the devices that are in our homes and our pockets to actually become smarter, but they're still dumb AF. But Alexa is the one that's going to like, it looks like Alexa is going to finally be our salvation. Like Alexa Plus is going to come out and people are going to expect to be able to talk to something and it to be smart. And the flip side of that is that when people recognize they're talking to a machine, they're not just going to hang up, which is the default in voice AI calls now. People just hang up. That's the main challenge you're trying to overcome when you're building a voice AI agent is hangups. People instead are going to be like, oh, it's a machine. I bet this thing's kind of smart. I bet it'll be able to help me. And I think that's really
going to be able to help me more than the IVR, the push 3 for sales, and also maybe better than the frontline customer service agent human who's had a really bad day, is at the end of their shift on the other side of the world.
Yeah, and who doesn't have access to as much data.
Exactly. Yeah, that's awesome. So what's next for you and what's next for Canonical?
I want to keep riding that voice AI wave. I want to be a part of this when it becomes normal for people to talk to voice AI agents, when it's an expected thing. And I think we're going to see so much growth in this industry. So I'm excited to just be a part of it. That's what's next for us. And I hope that we can continue to provide value and build something helpful to people that are working in voice AI.
That's awesome, Tom. Your enthusiasm is palpable, so I appreciate it. I didn't put this in the question list, but is there anything you've been reading or listening to or thinking about lately that you would recommend to folks that are listening?
So sci-fi is like my biggest productivity killer, and like so I try to avoid it. It's almost like, it's like a really nice bottle of wine. It's like it's best I just stay away from that. I just read Project Hail Mary. That was fun. And when I finished reading it, I set it down. I was like, yes, I'm free again. I can do other things with my life other than just read this book every moment I get, every chance I get. In terms of like more like professional related stuff, this isn't really something that is more broadly available to people, but the Voice AI WhatsApp group that we're part of, the YC Voice AI
Pretty
WhatsApp
cool.
group, is such high signal. Like there's people that are in there like talking about like the actual problems that they're having and like the answers you get from people. Like there's just so much. Oftentimes what I find myself doing is seeing what somebody writes in there and lurking, and then just like having a conversation with ChatGPT about what they said to try to better understand it. I should probably be contributing more and asking those follow-ups in the channel.
A lot of people in there, but yeah, agree.
Yeah, what about you guys? How would you answer that?
I'm reading this book called Why Nothing Works. It's about how kind of the pendulum swings of government regulation have made it so that really nobody's satisfied with status quo in terms of how things get done, whether that's in like housing or other parts of public policy. And it's just been interesting for me. It's like I have no professional relationship to it, but it feels like there's a lot of overlap between how government seems to work, at least from the outside, and how other big organizations work, whether they're an organization you're trying to sell to as a startup or an organization that you work for as an acquired company. And so, it's been a super interesting read.
I have mostly been coding. I'm being serious. I'm not really reading right now. I was. A week ago, I finally finished a book called Cadillac Desert, which I kind of come put down and come back to, but it's a book about how the American Southwest is essentially a desert, very relevant with respect to irrigation. It talks a lot about irrigation and about how American Southwest was kind of like transformed by these big waterworks projects. But it's also a huge downer of a book because like the whole vibe of it is, and someday it'll return to being a desert. And that's, very hard to keep reading. So I had to put it down repeatedly while I was reading it.
All right, Tom Shapland, thanks so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you on Twitter and elsewhere?
I'm really trying to grow my Twitter following, so I'd really appreciate if people reached out to me on Twitter. It's Tom_Shapland.
We'll link to it in the notes, of course.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd really appreciate it. And also check out our website if you're interested in what we're doing. If you Google Canonical Voice, you'll find us.
Awesome. Tom, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you guys for having me.